Hope you've sustained yourselves well at lunch, and apologies for the lateness of that lunch. We've got a busy program, of course. So we will now go to item 10. So reconvening the meeting, going to item 10. This is one of a number of national policy statement papers. This is the overview paper, and it gives the committee an overview of the NPSUD. Going back to a couple of years, and then the enabling housing legislation of middle to late last year. And it outlines just where we do have discretion and where we don't. So it's just a good, solid, factual, scene-setting paper for us to consider. And one of the attachments here is a chronology of the committee and the local board workshops. There's been a lot of engagement. And as these members on this committee know, we've embraced the local boards on that journey as well. So after we've considered this overview report, this factual account, we'll then move to the decision-making reports that follow. So this report is prepared by Megan Tyler, our Chief of Strategy, and John Dogood, our GM of Plans and Places. And we will now go to that overview, starting with our Chief of Strategy. Kia ora, Megan.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Welcome back, members. I just want to give a very brief introduction just to set the scene, as the Chair has said, for really the three reports that you're going to be considering next. So really the purpose here is just to tell the story of how we've got to where we've got to today. And just really briefly, since 2016, the government, or the various governments, have been particularly focusing on housing, particularly supply and affordability. And they've put out a number of policies through national policy statements or legislation to get some change across the nation, because these are national directions and national policy settings. And there are two pieces of policy in particular that we're looking at today, and effectively why we're asking you to make the decisions you are today. The first is the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, and that came in 2020, and it focuses on things like a well-functioning urban environment, housing affordability, housing demand and supply, accessibility to employment, transport, and some resilience to climate change. What it does, in essence, is it limits council's ability to use planning provisions to restrict intensification, and it gives the provisions of qualifying matters to be the way in which any kind of restrictions on that intensification would come about. And one of the most obvious and contentious ones that we've already spoken about today is special character, for example. And so the qualifying matter provision is the one where councils need to prove that there's a reason not to have the kinds of intensification required by the national legislation. So prove that, and then make those changes that are commensurate with those qualifying matters, those special things that we're trying to protect. The second piece of policy is the Resource Management Enabling Housing Supply and Other Matters Act. And that has gone further or added to what the NPSUD did, and that has required the medium density residential standards, or the MDRS, across all residential zones. And so you also hear people talking about a 3x3, so the kind of 3-story and three dwellings on any site. So that's in addition to the NPSUD provisions. The government, when they put that out late last year, they did not consult with the local government sector or any sector on any of that before they introduced it to Parliament and went through that submission and hearing process. So the Act was introduced and passed within a few months, and it was passed in December, finally came into force in December last year, December 2021. You had real concerns with the direction of that Act and some of the policies in it. And the Mayor and Councillor Darby represented you in front of the Select Committee at the end of last year to present those submissions. And if Sophie is online, I just want to provide just a quick clip of the Mayor's summary when he was summing up to the Select Committee, just to show the kinds of things that we talked about to government. Thanks, Sophie.
Same thing. So in essence, and I'm finishing on this point, we want more intensive housing. We're absolutely in favour of that, but please don't sacrifice quality for quantity. We can have quantity, but we can have quality too. Good houses built in the right places. And on that note, I'm going to pass to my colleague, Chris Darby. Thank you for giving me the time.
Thanks, Sophie. So, of course, the NPSUD and the Act itself are apply across the whole country, and in particular these Tier 1 or growth cities and regions, of which Auckland is one. Obviously, in Auckland's case, we've had the unitary plan. We did that 2016. That came into effect and has created enormous amounts of land and housing opportunities. However, this Act and the NPSUD still applies to us just as it does to any other of those growth cities that haven't done the work that we did through the unitary plan. So we started workshopping with you in September 2020 on the NPSUD at that time. And staff have been working, therefore, on the evidence, the interpretation, the changes required by the NPSUD. And of course, then in December, that was a little bit upended, if I'm being honest, by the Act that was passed. And so there is a whole lot more work that we've then needed to do since December to try and still make this notification date of August this year. We've had directions from you at various points, particularly in the middle of last year, on various aspects of the things that we still retain discretion over in the NPSUD and this Act. And one of those directions was whether or not we would go out in a draft form to get some feedback from Aucklanders to help them understand what's happening. So it's not the final decisions. There is still opportunity for change. But the question was whether we would do that like we did with the unitary plan. So it starts a conversation with Aucklanders, gets them understanding it before we actually formally start that statutory process in August. And that's effectively what you're being asked to consider today. There are a couple of other direction-setting papers around quality intensification in the city centre. But in terms of the engagement one, it is about, are you happy for us to put out some responses, preliminary responses to the NPSUD and the Act so that Aucklanders can start understanding what that looks like, understanding the parts where the government's already made decisions, there is no discretion, it's just going to happen, versus the parts where we do have some discretion. And so those are the areas we want people to feedback on. I have no doubt that Aucklanders will be concerned with some of the mandatory stuff. That's out of our hands, but at least it helps educate and start that conversation with Auckland about what the future could look like. So that's in effect the purpose of this report, was just to set that context and help with the conversations that you're going to have over the next few items as well. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Happy to leave it there and take questions or just listen to the debate. Thanks.
Thank you, Chief of Strategy Megan. Now we'll take some questions on this. I've got a request for comment from Councillor Henderson. Are there questions on this report, members? I'll just pause there. None? Okay, we're now going to comment. And
I could ask a question, Chris.
I didn't see, did you put, is it up ahead? Okay, Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. So I've got a question that goes to point 6 of the report, and point 6 details the 900,000 dwellings that are available through the unitary plan, but then in addition mentions that there's even more than that within when you take into account the city centre, mixed-use zone areas, future urban areas and the like. Is it possible to have an update as to what the amount is in total? The 900,000 plus, is it 900,000 plus, say, another 500,000? Can we have some detail? Because this goes to the later conversations that we're going to be having around the need to release more housing, especially in special character areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Megan, is that with you or John?
Kia ora, Councillor Walker. Thank you for your question. We are still doing that work. We have another housing and business assessment under the NPSUD due next year. So this work does take a little bit of time. So I'm not going to be able to answer your question immediately. We are also doing that capacity conversation or looking at that investigation with the NPSUD and this new MDRS provisions to see what that enables, and it's going to be far in excess of 900,000. We will have that for you for your August or those July-August decisions. I don't have that for you today. We're still working on that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the reason why that sort of information is important now, and by now I mean today, we are considering later in the agenda around these necessities to provide more density, especially in special character areas. Now, let's say we've got provision for 2 million homes. Let's say. It is ridiculous, therefore, for us to sacrifice aspects of our unitary plan, particularly around special character areas, that are locked down and have been consulted on at huge cost and stack up. So the answer to this question is actually imperative now, and I'm surprised that we don't have some detail to inform us. I mean, is it 900,000 plus 500,000?
Okay,
is it 900 plus 1 million? I mean, what is it? We must have some idea.
Okay, and you've heard the reply is that we do not have that now. Do you need to expand any further, Megan?
No, sorry, thanks.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, do we even have something of a rough order?
I think you've heard the reply, and I think John could actually probably later on cover some of the constraints that we're under to deliver this by 20th of August. And the legislation is very clear, and the advice notes that have come out of MFE are very clear as well. But I might come back to that. Maybe another councillor poses that question. Mayor Goff, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And question to Megan or John, I guess. We had a discussion earlier today around special character areas. And at the moment, I think, as required under the legislation, to have something under any other matter, such as a special character area, where a high standard is set. And to meet that high standard, we're suggesting at the moment, I think, that about 71% of the houses in special character areas or the special character areas themselves are protected against the otherwise requirement of what's in the NPSUD or the Enabling Housing Supply Amendment Act. If we were to, and we've based that 71% on either door-to-door or Google view of what constitutes a high level of quality housing in an area. Say we were to say we want the whole lot, 100% of the special character area protected in that way. What would be the likely consequence of that when that was a matter being heard by an independent hearing commissioner and or then going on to the minister for a decision?
Kia ora, Mayor Phil. Thank you for that. I'll just pass to John, and I think together we'll be able to respond to that. John.
Kia ora, Mayor Phil, members of committee. So it really would be flying in the face of the thrust of the NPSUD to simply retain or apply all existing special character areas in the intensification plan change we're required to do by August. We know through our surveys that there are streets and collections of streets where the character that one might think would be there is simply not there. So to apply a special character restriction to those locations where there simply isn't evidence of the character is really at odds with the thrust of the NPSUD. So particularly for those locations, it's our advice is that that's simply not a wise option and is unlikely to withstand submissions and the hearings process that would follow.
Okay, could I just add a supplementary through you to that, Mr. Chair? So if we tried to put 100% in, which would be hard to sustain on the evidence, is that something that where we would be putting at risk more of the area that we might be successful in protecting because we've tried to put everything in, and therefore we would come under challenge by the Independent Hearing Commissioner, and if there's a disagreement between the Commissioner and the Council, that would go to the Minister for a unilateral decision by the Minister. Would we be at risk, for example, that we'd be wound back to a lower level of protection than what we might otherwise achieve if we look like we've made best endeavours and we've soundly based the areas that we're insisting on protecting?
Back to you, John.
Meg Off, yeah, you have certainly identified a risk that we've certainly thought about as well, that if the approach that Council took for August was to not rely on evidence and the analysis of the special character areas that we've undertaken, then that there is a risk that that's perceived as Council really not taking the requirements of the NPSUD seriously, and other parties who would make submissions would, their evidence is likely to be given more weight. Is our concern about the risk there of that approach.
Yeah, is there anything you'd like to add to that, Megan?
Thank you. I was just going to say there is a risk of losing control of this a bit. So it is a difficult balance to make where we're looking at what is important, quite rightly, to communities and our values as Aucklanders, but a very clear direction from the government through the Act and the NPSUD that things need to change and there needs to be less restrictions, not more. So the more control I think that you as politicians can make, so do try and meet the intent of it, but also to protect those values that are important. That is best. And so I don't think keep retaining everything keeps that control for you. That would be my advice.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll now go to, I think it's the next question is Councillor Henderson.
I thought I had Richard Hills ahead of me, actually, did I?
I'll take
quite a few people ahead of me, actually.
It's Councillor Hills, Chair.
Yeah, feel free to circle back to me, mate. I'm still trying to narrow it down.
Okay, Councillor Hills, please.
Kia ora, Chair, thank you. The questions, I think, largely were answered from Mayor Goff, but I guess further to that discussion is I asked for that specific advice from the Minister, and I guess because we're making this decision later, I just want to reaffirm that what the bill has already done is effectively, and I spoke to John about this the other day, it's already effectively removed all protections. So it's removed all protections, and what we're doing with our plan change is trying to use evidence to put some protection back. It's not Council removing protections that has been done across the whole of Auckland already. So could you just clarify that part?
With John or Megan?
Yes, that's absolutely right. So when that 20th of August date comes where we're supposed to notify any of these kinds of restrictions and constraints will be removed unless Council applies through those qualifying matters to put them back. And that is effectively the conversation around special character areas and a few others that you're having today and through to August, where you make your final decision.
And so the advice I got direct from the Ministry said that we can no longer protect a suburb or an area as such. What do you got? How have you guys interpreted that with a special character area? We cannot legally do that. So how far can you go?
Thanks, Councillor. So the NPSUD is very clear that it's a site-by-site assessment. So the evidence is at a site level. It's not at a suburban or street level. Clearly, when we're talking about something like character, a street is important. But the level of evidence that we require is at a site level, not a street level. So the Ministry is right in the sense that without every individual site within a suburb having all the evidence to prove that it should be constrained, we can't do that anymore.
And apart from individual sites that were protected, say in a category protection, we had not done this work during the. So this is the first time we've ever looked at individual properties as a Auckland Council for heritage.
Yeah, so just to be clear, as you say, from a historic heritage perspective, we have scheduled buildings and places and spaces. So we're not talking about historic heritage. We are talking about the category which is more an amenity, so Section 7 at the moment, Section 7 issue of amenity and special character. So they are not historic heritage sites. So talking about the special character, for the unitary plan, we effectively rolled over or continued any areas of special character in any of the previous council's district plans. And there was probably almost all of them had some, but particularly the Isthmus and the North Shore in particular had quite a few. So and no, we have not done the kind of analysis that the NPSUD requires us to do now under Auckland Council.
And just last question, sorry, Chair. So effectively, and it's the advice I got from the ministry, but I just guess from you as well, Megan or John, is that if we decided at the meeting to protect 100% of currently special character areas without good basis for that, we run the risk of actually getting far less heritage protected that maybe the council has tried to through this process. We run the risk of it being taken out of our hands.
Megan again.
Yes, through the chair. So similar to the mayor's question, yes, that is my view. You do have the risk of getting it taken out of your hands. Can I just reiterate as well that the decision we're asking for you today is to go out and draft for Aucklanders, so it's not your final decision. Yep. This is this process of we want to put something out there for Aucklanders to understand and to feedback on. So whatever you decide is entirely up to you, whether it's 100% keeping it all or not retaining everything as we've recommended. But ultimately, your decision is going to come in kind of July or so, where we have to notify statutorily. And that's the particularly key decision, but this sets a bit of a direction for us, really.
Thank you. We'll go to Councillor Henderson now, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just got a couple of questions, but I'll be as brief as I can. Could we just clarify with this committee the rationale for a special character zone of protection versus the site-by-site assessment of heritage value that we've been asked to do? Why do we have special character zones?
John, is that with you?
Thank you, Chair. Well, they've been recognised by this council and the Legacy Council going back 25, 30 more years. They do reflect a significant component of Auckland's character and identity. So it's primarily around the fact that these areas, the vast majority of them, are an important part of Auckland's history, and locally, regionally within Auckland, nationally, and arguably internationally, they do form part of the identity of Auckland. So they're not entirely meeting the threshold for historic heritage of national significance. As Megan mentioned, it's that broader amenity Section 7 of the RMA that they largely rely on for their statutory protection or management. But in short, it is the part of the character and identity of Auckland.
Okay, so we're being directed to site-specific analysis, and Councillor Hills, thank you, has actually raised what we've been directed to do. How is that direction consistent with having special character areas going forward? Doesn't that run contrary to a site-specific analysis?
Through the Chair, the purpose of the site-specific analysis is, well, first of all, to gather the evidence as required by the NPSUD. So it's a statutory requirement that if council is looking to apply special character as a means of reducing the height or density that would otherwise be required under the NPSUD or the Amendment Act, then we need a site-by-site analysis. That's why that exercise has been undertaken. But it does provide the evidence as to which parts of the existing special character areas are of that do have those attributes that reflect the special character that they were intended to recognise and manage. And through the survey work, there are certainly some streets, certainly groups of properties, streets, even collections of streets that aren't making a threshold that really reflects that character that they're intended to represent. And that's why the survey was undertaken. And that's to assist the council in deciding what to do come August, off the back of the feedback that we'll be seeking from Aucklanders in April on this topic and many others.
Okay. How many special character areas do we have in West or South Auckland?
Very little compared to Central Auckland, and that simply reflects the historical pattern of Auckland's development. The city developed predominantly, certainly the early suburbs were emanating out from the central, from the city centre. And then as the trams came in, they extended a bit further. But it's that sort of pre-Second World War character that we're talking about here, and so it's not surprising that it's in those older parts of Auckland.
Thank you for your patience, Chair. One last question, follow-up. So our submission notes the capacity of the Auckland Unitary Plan and implies that housing isn't an issue anymore due to that capacity, but aren't we concerned as a council that the majority of development has occurred in the last 10 years away from existing transport and infrastructure, away from rapid transit, bus lanes, for example, of which there's 15 in the Central Isthmus? Is that not a concern for us?
Kia ora, Councillor Henderson. So I think that's very much at the heart of the intent of the NPSUD, is that a well-functioning environment should be one where you get the most capacity possible in those most accessible areas. And it is, and as John and I have said, much of the special character is in the kind of isthmus and edge of the shore, which are highly accessible. So it's as much about where it is as the fact that it is, because it's also a very small percentage, of land area and dwelling numbers across the region. So if you're talking about regional capacity, on one hand, you could say it makes no difference at all. It's only a few percent. It's really tiny. But I think the important thing for you to consider as a committee is where it's located.
I agree completely. Thank you. Cheers. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Now going to, I think the next question is from Councillor Dalton. No, sorry, Councillor Hills, please. No, back to Councillor Dalton. We swapped that around. Councillor
Thanks, Chair. Hey, thanks, Megan and John, for clarifying that, because I was getting a little perplexed this morning with different information around that. And when there was touted that there could be an amendment that the consultation would go out as status quo for the SCAs, that indeed could have quite a perverse outcome if we did that. So does the same go for a comment that was made from this morning regarding the threshold being too high at 75% and reduce it to 50%? Could the same logic be applied to that just might not be enough of an analysis to put through?
Megan, with you or John?
Thanks, Chair. I'll take that one. In simple terms, the lower you put the bar, the less likely it is that when assessed against the overarching objectives of the NPSUD around housing and development, the less likely it is that case, if that was where council was to go, would survive when a hearings panel is looking at submissions and evidence. So the lower you drop the bar for what is included, the higher the risk, and the less likely, in our advice, of that succeeding. Exactly where the bar is put, I guess that's, the committee has at this point resolved the sort of 75% of all properties in an area being of high quality. We're recommending as officers that that's put out to Auckland to give us feedback on that, give you feedback, so that that can inform your decision making in July and August. And then there'll be another round of submissions on that same point. And ultimately, it comes back to council from an independent panel. So, but at this early stage in the process, we're recommending that the approach the committee has previously agreed to is continued on. and we seek feedback on that, and we continue to do further work as council and look at that feedback, and there is further analysis to be done, particularly in those locations that were discussed previously by Councillor Henderson, to see exactly where it lands. But for now, we think the 75% threshold is a reasonably sound one to put out for feedback at this early stage.
Okay, thank you, John. I just have one more, Chair. Just previously when Councillor Walker was speaking, I think he said that we're asking to intensify or densify, especially in the special character areas. If we look at it holistically across Auckland, going to Councillor Henderson's point, it's not especially in the special character areas, is it? Where at the moment we're looking at 3% of Auckland, and some of that will be densified, let's say, but that is still the smallest, a very small amount. It just feels like it's quite polarizing when we look at the whole region, and so we're not especially doing this in the special character areas, but we have been directed to look at this.
John, can you respond to that, please?
Certainly, Chair. Well, that's correct. It's a small percentage, but as Megan mentioned previously, it is in those. It's predominantly in the areas that do have the great public transport around the train stations, in the inner part of the rail network, and around the city centre and Newmarket Metro Centre. So there is great access to employment, education in those locations. So there isn't a locational element to it. Advice is that when you look at the NPSUD, you can't simply stop at the fact that it's only 3% of the residential area, and therefore it's not having a significant impact. But you need to do a deeper dive and look at where that 3% is, and balance that up. And that's why our advice is that there needs to be some threshold set at a reasonable level to get that balance of enabling housing development in those prime locations for transport access and so on, with the importance of recognising, protecting Auckland's character and identity. So there needs to be a balance struck. Yeah.
Thank you, John. That's really clear and helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now go to the question of Councillor Watson.
Just a quick one to start off with, John. Are the ferry terminals classified as part of the rapid transit network?
Through the Chair, they're not part of the rapid transit network. They don't meet the definition in the NPSUD.
Okay, great. So just continuing the line of the Mayor in terms of this figure of 70%, he mentioned on a number of occasions as being what might be preserved. The corollary of that, of course, is that 30% goes with the stroke of a pen, the protection of nearly a third of Auckland's special character would lose its protection. That's a converse of that line of thinking, isn't it?
John?
I think that's certainly one way of looking at it. Again, as we've said before, and I think it was Councillor Hills mentioned, it's Chair Darby as well, that the default is that under the NPSUD is that these areas aren't recognised at all. It's a proactive, responsive council to identify them and essentially make sure that there's an approach that does recognise special characters as a qualifying matter. But the net result compared to the status quo would be on the 75% threshold, a 30% reduction based on the survey work to date.
Okay. I guess a lot of people would consider that very significant. We have had some discussion today about the Schedule 15 and the Auckland Unitary Plan as it goes to preserving special character. I've looked at a number of areas across Auckland that would conceivably be lost, and without naming them. They refer to these areas, and I'm just quoting verbatim here, as being significant for physical and visual qualities, retains large grouping of houses that collectively demonstrate late 19th century and early 20th century development, include villas, transitional villas, bungalows, demonstrate design principles and aesthetics from this period, as well as social patterns of the time. This area and its built fabric is a significant period of residential development that occurred in this area from around the 1890s. The built fabric includes houses, street layouts, and urban form, etc., etc. Now, wouldn't you agree that sort of commentary would indicate that those areas which would be lost have been identified as having the kind of special character traits that are worthy of protection? Because under our analysis with the 75% threshold, areas described as that, which I think most people, if they looked at it objectively, would say, well, they have got qualities there, that area that deserve protecting, would go. If we're talking about perverse results, isn't that a perverse result where that sort of area, not in close to a rapid transit mode, would go under what we're proposing? I think that would be a definition of perversity.
Is that a comment?
So my question really goes to Schedule 15, the descriptors that are in it for these special character areas, a number of which would be lost in that 30%.
Kia ora, Councillor Watson.
Statement, I'm
yeah,
not sure.
I mean, obviously, until we've completed all of the work and you make your final decision in kind of July or so, we can't confirm exactly which, if any, areas you decide to, to remove, or on the flip side, to actually retain. However, I'm sure that is true that some of those areas, or the kinds of environments you've described, would not make the cut. And all I can say to that is that we are working under a different legislative framework than we were in the legacy councils in Auckland and under the unitary plan that we did, 7 or 8 years ago. The government and the legislation is very clear that this kind of environment is not one that is automatically protected anymore.
No, I guess, and my final question, it goes to the apparent reticence for making a case for these areas. I guess that's my question to John Dogood, is that given commentary like that, notwithstanding the constraints that exist, and it goes to some of the options that have been put up by people earlier on, that shouldn't Aucklanders be asked if it's worth making a case for the balance of this 30 in terms of what we've been asked to do, when we have commentary like that would seem to me to be the starting point, not the point that you buckle under and say, well, we don't want to be too brave or we might lose everything.
I think we just have to take that as comment, Councillor. I don't think that's a question, and it's not fair to put it that way to our staff. If you can really point it in a precise question, I'm happy to accept it and see it answered.
Okay, so my question is, precisely as I can manage, is that we have, in my view, and I've read through it now, in special character schedule 15, there is any amount of details that would go towards making a potential case for the third of heritage that we could otherwise lose. That's my question.
I'm not hearing that as a question. I'm hearing it as a statement.
Oh, well, I don't know how much clearer I can make it. Is there or is there not content in Schedule 15, Special Character Schedule, that could go towards making a case for a wider protection of our special character areas than the 70% that is being discussed?
John, can you fetch that, or Megan, sorry?
Kia ora. Yeah, look, I think I do understand your question, Councillor Watson. Yes, that information is useful, but again, remembering we're under a different framework, so we have to do a site-by-site assessment. Also, the other point of going out to informal or draft consultation is exactly for this point, because we will get feedback from Aucklanders. Some, of course, will be really supportive of retaining all or some protection. Some, of course, will want it removed entirely. So we will get that feedback. But all the information we already have helps us to come to a conclusion or to provide you with advice so that you make a decision. But remembering we're in a different framework and we can't just use the stuff we've already got, because we need to do it at a site-by-site level now.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Megan. I'm not suggesting we just use what we've got. I'm suggesting that we look to bolster it where possible. So rather than going for the lowest bargaining position, we go for a much higher one. We be a little braver than has been indicated so far. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Walker, please.
Sure. So I'll just put a variation on the question that's just been asked, and that is at a site-by-site level, and I'll repeat that, at a site-by-site level, are not the issues that Jeremy Salmon identified that go to historic patterns of land use, forms and patterns of subdivision, patterns of buildings, patterns of streetscape, are not they also exemplified, identifiable at a site-by-site level? Is that not the case?
Megan or John, who's best to answer that, please?
It's just a principled question.
Yep, we're just finding. I think John was just about to respond.
Chair, well, the short answer is yes.
Okay, so
relevant.
No,
yes.
sorry, Councillor. Wait for the full reply. That the officer only had the chance to say 3 words.
Yes, is
John,
all
back
I'm
to you.
after.
Yes, they're relevant, and they are the sorts of factors that can be seen within the evaluation framework that the heritage team have used as they've done the site-by-site analysis. It does roll up into a wider assessment of the area, so it is consistent with that.
Understood. So what follows from that is, if we accept that the analysis that we've done is very simplistic, it's been done on the basis of Google Street View, it hasn't been done on an accurate site-by-site basis for somebody viewing it and viewing the property, is it not conceivable that if we were to do that and are mindful of all of the information that we've got in Schedule 15, where that analysis in Schedule 15 was supported by such work, is it not conceivable, if we applied some time and resource, that we would be able to lift the bar, because we would be taking into account the full range of matters, as Jeremy Salmon has pointed out, that we could and should be able to put forward? Is that possible?
Okay, John, can you clarify the contention that this has only been undertaken by Google at a desktop?
Yeah, so ideally this sort of work will be done in the field, but as we all know, with the restrictions around the pandemic, halfway, or about a third of the way probably, no, it was halfway into the survey, that no longer became possible. And so given the time constraints on us, that we have to have this work done and robust by August to put up a proposed plan change, the team had no option other than to look at the Google Street View tool. So roughly half and half is half done by driving around, walking around the 21,000 or so properties, and the other half done by Street View. The Google Street View photography, from memory, talking to Heritage Manager Noel, is about a year to 2 years old, maybe 3 at the absolute most. So it is pretty reliable in terms of what you see in Street View is pretty up to date. So not absolutely perfect, but the best that we can do to gather the evidence in order to apply any special character areas as a qualifying matter. Because in the absence of evidence, the default, as I've mentioned, is that there is no recognition under the NPSUD of special character. So that's the situation with the Google Street View. Councillor Walker, I think there was another question in there, so apologies.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair, if we accept that the matters that Jeremy Salmon raised, that, as you've acknowledged, go to the site-by-site view, could almost certainly be done expeditiously because they go to streets. Obviously, they go to individual homes, but equally they go to the setting that that home is within. Is it not conceivable that we could arrive at that information over some intervening weeks to bolster our position? And if we take into account the view that certainly Troy Churton and others have taken around a precautionary principle, is it not desirable for us to have a higher bar, you know, and in this instance, that might involve going down from 75% to lower, knowing that we've already done the Section 15 analysis and knowing that I would suggest there's a high degree of certainty that the additional information will support our case. So I'll just leave that question on the table for now and ask a related question, and that goes to the requirement for us to provide more density within these special character areas. And I think you know this question, John. If we accept that there are going to be sites where intensification can take place, where there may be a property that frankly is of no special character at all, but there could be some development that could be put in place that is sympathetic to the character, but you've got a new dwelling or dwellings that are sympathetic. Can that help meet the density requirements in these areas? And have we quantified that? Have we done any work on quantifying how we can take advantage of density in these areas?
Through the chair, Councillor Walker, that is work that's underway. Again, given the complexity of this exercise and the fact that the widespread nature of this medium density restores that was introduced just before Christmas, it broadened the scope of the work that we're having to do on special character, really. So we simply haven't had the time to do that analysis of impacts of capacity of various different scenarios, but it's certainly work that will need to be done, is being done. We'll be able to bring that advice to you together with feedback from Aucklanders on the approach to special character in order for you to make decisions. So I think the key point really is that this is very much work in progress. Comments from people like Jeremy Salmond are all extremely helpful. I haven't had a chance to talk to the Heritage team in any detail about the recent information from Jeremy, but it's, the feedback I've had, initial feedback, is that much of what is being mentioned is covered in the methodology. So there's perhaps some conversations to be had there with some of our heritage experts in Auckland and elsewhere. So look, it's an evolving approach. We're at the point simply of seeking feedback. This isn't the point of council making decisions. And at this point, all that information is extremely useful in framing up a response for July, August.
So, supplementary question to that. I've got one very important supplementary question, Mr. Chair.
Order,
can I ask it?
Order, please.
It is.
Thank you. I will come back to you because you've asked 6 questions. But members, before I go to the next question, and I think that is from Councillor Simpson, can we be mindful of the report that is in front of us? This is the overview report.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
And the number of the point of order?
My question goes to
sorry, Councillor. If you're going to raise a point of order, you need to refer me to the point of order.
My point of order
as per the standing orders.
Just bear with me, Mr. Chair. You as chair have directed that we as councillors put forward questions in writing to officers and that the officers will be addressing those questions.
I'll just call you to order, Councillor, and I'm now going to Councillor Simpson for the next question. And can we be mindful of what this report is that we are discussing and asking questions on at the moment? This is the overview report. So can I please take the call now of Councillor Simpson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll keep my questions brief. Megan, is it legal to go out for consultation, including all current SCAs?
Look, can I just come? That is a question for another report. It's not a question of this report. This is the overview report. And
Councillor, Mr. Chairman, I understand that, but my board is listening. They cannot listen to the confidential. It's still part of the overall, and I think it's important. We've had public forum on this. We've had, local board input on this, and they will not have a chance. And I think if we make a decision on whatever that is in confidential, I just think there needs to be some public context around that. So I've got almost yes or no answers that are required, Mr. Chair, and they're quick. Please give me the courtesy of just allowing me to rattle through them.
Proceed with the questions then.
Thank you, Chair. So Megan, answer.
Yes.
Right, thank you. Is there room, following the consultation with Aucklanders, to amend our SCA requirements based on the feedback that we get from Aucklanders?
Yes.
If you were trying to prove to Aucklanders that heritage or special character was important to Auckland Council, would you not start with going out with all the special character areas as we currently have?
It's not quite a yes or no, Councillor Simpson.
Sorry, okay.
That's fine.
Yeah, I know that you can't. Okay, that was unfair, probably, but you get my point, don't you? What I'm trying to ascertain is by going out with all SCAs, that's not illegal. I'm also trying to ascertain that there is room, following the feedback from Aucklanders, to amend whatever. Because I do hear, and I was listening to the Mayor, I do hear that fear, for want of a better word, bad choice of probably, but I do hear that concern that actually if we start at the point that we're currently at, we might end up by worse than where we are. So I just want to balance that by trying to prove to Aucklanders that this is important to us, and we could go out with that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for those succinct questions too. And now I have a question from, I think the next is from Councillor Sayers. Councillor Sayers, your call.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just through you, I'm just trying to get a balanced understanding here. If the scenario ended up that somebody independent had to come in because of the position that we took, to me it seems, Mr. Chair, that could be a very strong signal to somebody independent of dissatisfaction from us as a committee. So my question is, couldn't that equally work in our favour, I guess, Chris, is what I'm trying to understand, because of the strong signal that we've sent out and perhaps wanting more consideration for a case, about wider protection around these special housing areas. So would an officer be able to comment on that for me from the, I guess, the other side of the coin?
Thanks, Councillor.
Okay.
Who would like to take that? John, Megan?
Kia ora, Councillor Sayers, thank you. Look, it's always a guessing game, isn't it, depending on who the independent panel is and what their views are and how they view the evidence that we will need to provide for any and all of our changes, so not just around special character. However, they will be very clear about the purpose, and what they are looking at is the objectives and policies and intent of the NPSUD and the Act. And I guess all we're saying as staff is that we think we are no longer in a position that we can retain, in the special character example, we're not in the position where we can retain everything that we have now when we look at those objectives and policies of the NPSUD. Therefore, we're advising you that there needs to be some change. And the independent hearing panel will be looking at exactly the same question. So, of course, they may not agree with us as staff or you as the committee, or they may. You're right, we don't know. It could, they could be very supportive of whatever we put out come August. I guess there's a question there, and so all we're saying is our advice to you is to retain as much control, I guess, of this as you can, and in doing so, recognising that we don't think that full retention is really an option anymore, but that is ultimately up to you.
All right, thank you very much, Megan. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sayers. Councillor Fletcher. your question, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to Megan. It's a great report insofar as it reminds us all how we've been spending our lives for quite some time. It's comprehensive, and you are reminded at just the level of this. From my simple perspective, what appears to be the outcome at a high level is we're wanting more transit-orientated development that is affordable. And I think there's a general consensus around that. There may be some who disagree, but I think the majority of the politicians, central and local, that I have spoken to, the problem is it's getting really complex, and it is such that in order to work out what weighting we should give on what we undertook in the unitary plan, or what was the minor difference between this person or that person's perspective from the first reading and the second reading of the bill, all of this, we could go down those rabbit holes. But my question to you is simply, given the complexity, and what external contestable advice have you received on the recommendations, which I can see you're trying to put to us very carefully? And I don't want to put you on the spot, but you would be aware that some of us have had extensive lobbying from some of the MPs that voted for this to say that the way that the officers are interpreting it is wrong. So I want to know and give you the platform to tell us why you believe your advice is right, and have you received any external legal contestable advice to reinforce that point?
Kia ora, Councillor Fletcher. We have in-house lawyers, and we obviously have some external lawyers that assist us at times as well. So we have been working with both, so external and internal lawyers, around the interpretation, as you say, of whether it's the NPSUD itself or the Act. We have a few consultants as well, externals, helping, but also we have been working, I think John might have mentioned it earlier, we've been liaising with ministry officials as well, because of course this is coming from government. So we have been talking with them and also receiving guidance that they've put out. And in fact, there's an attachment, I think it's the next paper, the city centre paper. There's an attachment that talks through some guidance that the Ministry for the Environment has put out about the interpretation and the process around the NPSUD. So on that basis, my answer is yes. However, if you were asking in particular about the advice around, say, special character, and have we had people look at that, fully and robustly towards an August decision, I think the answer would be no. We've had some externals on it, but this is kind of a draft, and so we continue to do work between now and that July-August time, where we will ultimately advise you for your decision. So that work will come, but we have not completed it yet.
Mr. Chair, I'm very mindful of the time. I really would like to explore this further, but I will defer to somebody else and perhaps come back to more details in subsequent agenda items.
Thanks, Councillor. And on that note of time, I need to move an extension of time, and I'll do so until the close of business. Do I have a second?
Happy to second.
Yes, happy to second.
Seconded.
Chair.
I think I heard Councillor Walker second. So I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye.
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 Contrary,
Aye.
no. Declare that carried. Thank you. Carrying on with questions, I will now get to, and thank you, Councillor Fletcher. I will now go to Councillor Newman.
Yes, thank you. Look, I want to acknowledge Megan and John and Aaron Shields and the planning staff have been doing the work in this space. I've read Schedule D of the unitary plan. I've also read the operative parts of the plan, and I want to just check in relation to the special character area overlay for Hill Park. It's not heritage overlay; it's a trees overlay. I just want to get clarification. Is that dealt with at some point as part of a future consideration, or is that excluded? I would imagine when it is considered, there is obviously an opportunity to consider the qualifying matters in relation to trees and sequestration of carbon, but it's not identified obviously as a matter of heritage. So can you clarify how that particular overlay will be dealt with? It is a special character overlay, but it is not heritage.
Thanks, Councillor. John, is that best with you?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Newman. Probably in terms of the agenda item right now, given it's the overview, getting to specific locations is probably more for the subsequent item. And what I can say is that the committee has agreed that special character areas of high quality at this point in time should be a qualifying matter for reducing heights and density that would otherwise be required. Significant ecological areas that are mapped in the unitary plan, potentially I think through the area you're mentioning, are also deemed to be a qualifying matter by council at this point in time for getting that feedback in. So yeah, perhaps if it's okay to leave it at that point, but yeah, there are factors over and above the built character that the committee has agreed are a potential reason for limiting height and density in certain suburbs, neighbourhoods.
Okay, look, thank you, John. And yeah, it's a bit unfair of me to put you on the spot there, obviously, on a public item. But I guess what I want to then therefore ask is that, notwithstanding the fact as to how we might deal with that, is to ensure that we have the defensible argument around that as per our research, because ultimately we have to defend every single one. And a lot of the work obviously has been going on in terms of this heritage space first and foremost. So we'll deal with it in a future item, but thank you for your comments in this particular matter.
Thanks, Councillor. I will now take the question of the Deputy Chair, Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Chair. So just to confirm, please, because I'm hearing that people are worried that some of those heritage homes, villas will be busted down. Can you confirm that's not the case? They still have heritage protection?
John.
Through the Chair, so Councillor Bartley. At this point in time, they have the areas that we're talking about have a special character protection. It's not what we would refer to as historic heritage. So they're not individual historic heritage places or groups of historic heritage places, but they do have the character protection. And in most cases, not all, but that does require resource consent for demolition of the dwelling. So in most cases within the special character areas at the moment, demolition requires a consent. But unless the council, once again, proactively introduces as a qualifying matter some or all of these areas, then as of the 20th of August, the default would be that they would have to enable the 3-storey medium density, or if they're in a walkable catchment of a train station, the city centre or the metro centre, they would have to enable the 6 stories. So 20th of August is a point at which that demolition protection would disappear effectively, unless the council takes an approach of having some or all of these character areas identified as a qualifying matter. So, but at this point in time, they have the demolition protection in most situations within the special character. Come 20th of August, if they aren't introduced by council as a qualifying matter, then that would disappear, given the legislation.
Now, taking the question of Councillor Stewart. Councillor Stewart, here you are.
Right, I've got 2 questions. First, for the special character area, can we go out for a consultation with more than one scenario? And my second question is on qualifying matters. Will there be consideration, for example, how at Pikarangi, Cockle Bay catchments where we already know there's stormwater flooding issues and a lot of properties are already affected? Will these be taken into account as qualifying issues? Thank you.
John.
Kia ora, Councillor Stewart. Let me answer the first and John will answer the second. So look, because this is draft consultation, it's not statutory. Effectively you can decide to do whatever you like. Our advice around more than one scenario is just one of possible confusion and whether we can do it in a way that is clear and understandable. My concern about going out with let's just say two scenarios on special character from the GIS maps perspective is I don't think we've got time between now and the 19th of April to have a system that can allow you to see two different scenarios, well, three when you're including the existing scenario at the same time. So I am concerned that we're not going to have time to be able to show that in maps. We could possibly do that in a text form, do you know what I mean, in a sense of kind of describing it in text. I do think that would become very confusing, but it's something that you can consider maybe when you're looking at that report. You might want to bring it up again then. So I'll leave that response firstly, and then John will answer your second question.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart and committee. So the Amendment Act, the Housing Amendment Act, and also the NPSUD do allow council to continue on with things like our rules around development in floodplains. So we have floodplains indicatively mapped in our GIS system, and so it is a rule in the unitary plan that when you're putting housing in those floodplains, it requires a resource consent, and there's no guarantee that you will get that consent, and there's strong policy in the unitary plan around the risks of developing in floodplains. The NPSUD itself recognises that areas of significant natural hazards, such as flooding, are something that can essentially override the 3-storey medium density or the 6 stories in the walkable catchments. So our existing rules will carry on through, are able to carry on through. Linked to flooding is amount of impervious surface on a property. So those rules are also able to continue on through, and in the drafting of this plan change, it's not just about the maps, there's also a whole lot of amendments to the text of the unitary plan, and we're certainly looking at that very carefully as to what impervious area restrictions should continue to apply right across the urban area. So that should help significantly in terms of dealing with any flooding hazards. But it's a ongoing piece of work, like a lot of this. We don't have the absolute solution yet for putting out to Aucklanders for feedback on this particular topic. We are proposing to ask Aucklanders some questions around significant infrastructure constraints and what that might mean for Council's response in August. And we'll certainly bring back more information to you from the feedback on that question, but also the technical work that we're doing with our Healthy Water staff through workshops between April, May, and your final decisions for the proposed plan change in August.
Thank you, John. Now, I think I'm now with Independent Borough Statutory Board Member Karen Wilson. Is that the next question, Calindus?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It may be that this is answered a lot better, John and or Megan, in the subsequent agenda items, but I thought I'll pose it now because there has been a lot of kōrero in respect of the special character and qualifying matters, and I get a little bit nervous when you consider the sites of significance and the work that's yet to be done in that space around it being a qualifying matter. So do you think within the agenda items that will be presented, that will give more certainty around the vigilance that also will be applied to sites of significance as it relates to qualifying matters?
John or Megan?
Chair, Member Wilson. Yes, the overview report doesn't really go into a huge amount of detail, much detail at all in terms of conversations we've been having with mana whenua and more recently Matawaka around issues of significance to Māori. So it certainly is in the subsequent item. There's a lot more detail. We have a presentation, but what I can certainly say is sites of significance to mana whenua, the planning committee has agreed, must be a qualifying matter. We are having conversations around what other means of protection that may need to apply, and that's an ongoing discussion with mana whenua around the culturally significant sites. So I think it's probably best to go into a bit more detail in the subsequent item where we have a presentation that really sets the scene on that one. But certainly a lot of engagement happening, a lot of input from mana whenua, and strong support for protecting areas of cultural significance, not just areas that are identified in the unitary plan, but other areas that may be at risk if the council doesn't have a response in time for August.
Thank you, John. Reassurance has been given. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Member Wilson. I think that concludes the questions. I'm just checking with you, Kalinda, if I missed anybody in that chat bar on the side there, please.
No, that's the end of questions, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to any debate, comment here, members, on the overview report. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'll be brief because a lot of my comments I suspect I'll make a bit later on in future papers today. But I just, given that we have the attachment A there, I wanted to very briefly remind everyone, as is apparent, that I voted against the council submission, and I actually did that when we had the memorandum brought to us in a previous planning committee. So I just didn't want people to take that me voting to receive this supports our submission, because I have to say, with no disrespect to those who wrote it and those that worked really hard on it, so I just acknowledge you for that, but it doesn't choose housing Auckland as our most important goal. Our submission let down the people that are living in cars and garages in the city, let down Auckland central businesses that would love to have more consumers locally based, let down suburbs, particularly West and South Auckland, but others as well, that are asked to take all the growth with our current models. It says to Auckland that even though there are 15 rapid transit bus routes in central Auckland, we shouldn't put housing in a lot of it. It lets down the compact city model that we've already talked about this week. It takes a conservative approach when we should be focusing on housing Aucklanders close to where they work and study as a bottom line. That is the approach that we should have taken, and we didn't do it, but that's something that I've always been consistent about, and I just wanted to make that clear. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other comments to be made here, members? Just, if I may, I might just add to some context that contributes to this overview report, hopefully. And there have been some questions, and Councillor Henderson's referred to this in part. I sought some detail from our strategy and research unit on where is the population growing and where is the density of population growing and where is the density of housing growing and what was the baseline. And it's taken about a month to compile this, and I'm happy to share it with the members. It's just been received recently, and it accounts for the period 16 through to 21, takes into account census data, and it comes from our research unit, our very own research unit, who we rely heavily on. We know how solid they are. So since 16 to about October 21, there's been about 74,000 dwelling units consented. And the highest number of consents are in Upper Harbour at 6271, Bays Hibiscus at 5818, and Papakura at 5720. They're the top three. The greatest population growth in that time has been Papakura, plus 24.2, Rodney, plus 21.4, and Upper Harbour, plus 13.4. That's the top three. Then we go to the population density. Where's the highest amount of population density currently or over those 3 years? It's city centre, Otahuhu, Papatoetoe, and Manurewa. And then the highest increases in dwelling density in that period are Silverdale, Long Bay, Takapuna, Hobsonville, Northcote, Kingsland, Morningside, Three Kings, Oranga, Takanini, and all up 17 hotspots of density growth. So that gives you, this is actually just the facts. That's all I can give you here. It's just the facts. And we've received quite a bit of criticism that the isthmus has been let off the hook. Well, not according to the research data. Oranga's in there, for example, and Morningside and Kingslanders. We've also, it's been suggested that the proximity to the city centre is very important, and so those inner suburbs should take greater density. Fair question, but that's not, according to this data, that's not where all the jobs are, of course. And proximity to city centre jobs is important, but it overlooks 57% of the jobs in Auckland are in 9 other anchor centres, and they are airport and surrounds, fast-growing Albany North Harbour, East Tamaki Botany, Takapuna, including Snails Farm and Hospital, Rosebank Peninsula, and there's about another 4 as well. And 41% of the consents issued in the last, 6 years, have been issued for in the rural urban boundary area are within 2 kilometres of those 9 job anchors. So 41% are within 2 kilometres of those 9 major job anchors. So look, there's a bit more here, and I'll make sure that this does come to members, because it is quite revealing as to what the facts are, what the evidence is, and we're beginning to get to a stage where whatever we put into a plan change has to be strongly evidence-based. Otherwise, we will lose it when we come to being tested through a hearing and being heard by the commissioners and counter evidence. So that's a question that will be faced in a later paper, but they are the bare bone facts, and I'm happy to share those with the members. Now, I have a comment also from Councillor Walker, please.
So my comment just goes further to the question that Councillor Stewart raised, where the answer was yes, we could have more than one scenario, but the comment on the part of the officers is that could be difficult if we weren't able to substantiate that second scenario. Now, if that second scenario, let's say rather than 75%, dropped down to 50% for special character area, and it aligned almost identically with the unitary plan, if that were the case, I'm assuming there would be no problem going out with that scenario, because effectively we would have already done the work. So I'll just leave that comment on the table, Mr. Chair, because it is vital that we as councillors consider options that members of the public, particularly people that know and love these areas, would expect us to ask and consider.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Newman, your call, please.
Oh, look, Chair, there are members of Parliament who have voted for legislation who are hoping like anything that we will identify qualifying matters that will keep the consequences of their vote away from their electorates. That's just the reality of what we're facing here. I think that, this isn't a Pontius Pilate argument here, Chair, but I think that this is really a classic example of local government having no choice but to deal with the consequences of what Parliament has directed, including the perverse outcomes of what Parliament has directed. The regulatory impact statement for the legislation that has been passed is damning, and I'm sure that there's a number of people who've been involved in the debates around this piece of law who are very embarrassed by it. In fact, I know they are. Chair, actually, you and I strongly agree on this point, that the position that we face is one of, if you want a qualifying matter, you have to have that fully evidenced to defend it before commissioners who will be held responsible if they seek to achieve an outcome through the commissioners' hearings and deliberation, which is in effect contradicting the intention of what Parliament has codified. And for that reason, I think the officers are right. But I do hope that the research that will form the basis of evidence for the plan changes and the submissions that will have to go into the hearings process will be comprehensive to defend every qualifying matter. Otherwise, they'll simply have to be struck down. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Chair, Councillor Bartley, please.
Thank you, Chair. I found your comments were interesting, given what I've seen from Build More Homes and Scoot, I think it is, regarding Auckland being a donut city. And when you do look at the map that they have, intensification is actually more in the outer suburbs as opposed to the inner suburbs, hence the image of a donut. So I find that quite interesting. You also mentioned Oranga. Oranga is not in the city suburb. It's more Onehunga out to Mangere Bridge, that kind of way. So anyway, I also wanted to comment on the response from John Dugood when I asked about heritage. I think in terms of heritage, my understanding is that there is protection for homes, but the character is what is, being looked at, being removed. I take on board a lot of the comments coming through about the character of Auckland. Another character of Auckland is the people. And there are a lot of people that are locked out of the housing market, that are locked out of renting homes. So be, good to consider them in all of this as well. So yeah, I look forward to this going out there to the public. I hope we are asking the public what they think are the major issues for Auckland, and a lot of them will say it's housing. So anyway, yeah, that's just my brief comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartley. Now, did I take the comment of Councillor Watson?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just a brief commentary, given that this is an overview and there has been reference to the council's position it's taken, and indeed it is articulated in the attachments here. So I think it's important just to remind Aucklanders what Auckland Council did say about these proposals, because I rather suspect that hasn't filtered through to the ordinary person in the street. Without going into too much detail, we simply said that this enabling legislation will, amongst other things, result in many Aucklanders living in places where it is simply unviable to provide the necessary physical and social infrastructure. It'll run against the compact city approach. It continues despite the fact we have well over 900,000 dwellings to be built on. And it would result in poor quality design outcomes. That was some of the things we say are waiting further down the line with the progression of this legislation. If that wasn't enough, the points that really stood out for me, and it's in our attachment A, is the fact that this, in respect of the medium density provisions, they will actually work against achievement of a well-functioning urban environment, both regionally and at the neighbourhood scale. It would disperse medium density housing across the urban area, unsupported by, reasonable public facilities. And I guess the key point for me was the comment that it would result in poor quality built outcomes that reduce livability for residents. So far from not standing up for Auckland residents, the position the council has been on part of Auckland residents saying that they deserve better than is coming down this pipeline. I guess in that respect, Mr. Chair, what I do find a little objectionable, and I saw it during the time of the unitary plan, is the assertion that somehow this legislation will result in the poor family who are living in a car, or the young people and the not so young people also, I might add, shut out of housing, who will suddenly be waltzing down to their terraced house on Northcote Point or Birkenhead Point. That is simply not true. Any objective analysis of what's proposed here will have the effect of increasing the value of properties right across Auckland, so they will make them less obtainable because the value of a product is a property is a product of its development capacity, which is going up under this provision. So those houses will automatically go up, and even allowing for the replacement if houses are knocked down and cleared, it will result in the same pattern that's happening already, where yes, one house at 1.5 million might be knocked down and another 8 put in, but those other 8 put in, as I see on numerous occasions across my ward, are all 1.5 million too. So the notion that this somehow translates into the poor, dispossessed getting housing is simply not true. It hasn't been borne out by the unitary plan, and it will be exacerbated by what's proposed under this legislation. If you do want to go to an answer for those poor people, increasing numbers who are locked out, you should really look at the research of Kay Saville-Smith, which shows that over the last 4 or 5 decades, how we've ended up where we are now. And that, amongst other things, resulted in the virtual disappearance of construction of low-cost housing, which at one point used to be 33% of our housing stock, not low quality, low cost, and you see that in any number of the group housing around Auckland, and the withdrawal of government money, which at one point was up around about the 30% in terms of capitalisation of family benefits and state advances loans, disappeared courtesy of Roger Douglas and his merry crowd in the late 80s and disappeared down to virtually nothing. That's the seed of our troubles today that has been exacerbated along the way. The solution is not through this ad hoc rampant development that has more to do with political window dressing than anything. It's to do with a new product, a low cost housing product similar to what we had in the 60s and 70s that is accessible to those people on medium and lower incomes. That's not going to change with this. It's going to get worse. So we were correct in our assessment and our submission, and unless there's some attempt to claw back in that, the outcomes will be exactly those that our officers and our mayor articulated in the submission that was presented to Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll hear from the mayor now. Mayor Phil Goff.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll make my comments now, maybe rather than later on. And the first comment is probably in line with what John Watson has just said. The problem we're dealing with here is not one of our making. This is a problem that has been created by Parliament. I use the word Parliament advisedly because both sides of Parliament, both major parties, have foisted on us something that we strongly resisted, not on any basis of, NIMBYism, but we believed that they were going down the wrong track. This council has always supported intensification to create a compact, quality urban form. What we're against is the sort of modern day sausage flat developments that they're going to create, because on the 3x3 scale, that probably won't be what goes up in the areas that we're talking about in terms of special character areas. They'll go up in the poorer areas because that's where they always put that sort of development up. And secondly, look, I respect Councillor Shane Henderson's viewpoint, but this is not a case of having to choose between preserving heritage or housing our people. We can preserve the best of our heritage and not at the expense of housing our people. We are doing intensification now. 2/3 of our housing is either terrace housing or apartment blocks. And the sort of housing where we want to build up will be around the metro centres, the city centre and transit-oriented development. The problem is not zoning, as the Parliament pretends. It's about providing the infrastructure to enable it to go ahead. My last point is on this question of heritage. And, I've said before at this committee that I think heritage is really important to give a city character, identity, to tell it about where our people, about where we've come from, a sense of history for it. And I want to preserve as much of that heritage as we are capable of preserving. And that has always been my position. But what do we put out to consult with people about in terms of what we can preserve? And there are 2 points I want to make here finally. One is we need a defensible argument about what we're putting up to protect in terms of the intentions and purposes of the Act. If we don't do that, if we put stuff in, and our officers have told us this, not all of our special character areas are defensible. And if we put stuff in that is not defensible, that will simply lead independent hearing commissioners or the minister, where it will likely end up with saying, these guys aren't for real, they're not genuine, look, there's holes in their arguments, and we'll lose more than we gain from it. I think the second risk that I want to draw attention to is if we create expectations in the public mind that we can protect areas which professional advice tells us that we can't protect, then we're misleading our public. So I think we've just got to be totally straight. This is what we need to do to succeed. We've had professional advice around that. Let's not pretend that advice doesn't exist. Let's not go out and say, oh, well, we'll wear our heart on our sleeve and we'll say we're in favour of protecting everything. If we lose more than we gain by using the wrong tactics, then we're not serving the purpose that we're claiming to want to serve. And that's my comments on the overview. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mayor, and we'll close it at that. Actually, I did move it before, but maybe it's not recorded. Councillor Bartley will second. This is item 10. I've got now Councillor Fletcher. Okay, I was taking the Mayor as closing, but Councillor Fletcher, your comment, please, then.
I apologise. I didn't realise he was to close. I will be very brief then. I think the majority of us know that the purpose of this is not going to address affordability or supply. It's not going to change the price of land in a lot of those areas that we want to see. It's too little too late, as others have said. It's window dressing by both of the Parliament major parties. But it does reinforce my view that we have not been effective in the lobbying that we do with Parliament. So I think perhaps we're all in, not all, but most of us are in general agreement, but it's the detail. And that's why I asked before about what independent advice there had been in terms of the strategy going forward. So I support the Mayor. I don't necessarily agree with the strategy that he's articulating for getting there, and that's for subsequent debates this afternoon.
Okay, thank you. And we'll now just, the motion is moved and seconded. We'll put it to the vote. All those in favour say aye.
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 Contrary, no, and declare that carried. I think I'd like to take a 5-minute break now. We'll take a 5-minute break. So we'll stand adjourned until let's make it 4:40. 4:40 we'll reconvene. Oh.